Once upon a time, the trees decided to choose a king. First, they said to the olive tree, "Be our king." But the olive tree refused, saying, "Should I quit producing the olive oil that blesses both God and people just to wave back and forth and lord over the trees?" No. Then they said to the fig tree, "You be our king." But the fig tree also refused, saying, "Should I quit producing my sweet fruit just to wave back and forth over the trees?" No. Then they said to the grapevine, "You be our king." But the grapevine also refused, saying, "Should I quit producing the wine and the grapes that bring joy to both God and people, just to wave back and forth and lord over the trees?" Then all the trees finally turned to the thorn bush and said, "Come, you be our king." And the thorn bush replied, "Sure, I'll be your king. But that means you need to bow down and take shelter in my shade. And if you don't, I will rain fire down upon you and devour all of you, even the mighty cedars of Lebanon." Now that's a story from the Bible, the book of Judges, chapter 9. If you've never read the book of Judges, it made quite an impact on me as a young man. There's some pretty exciting and R-rated stories in there. But what a brilliant story. So many insights written over 3,000 years ago that are completely applicable to our modern day. Here are a couple of the insights we see in this story. Number one, those who have a clear purpose in life have little interest in position and power and privilege and authority over others. They have very little interest in ruling over other people. Number two, people who are interested in power and privilege and position and ruling over other people often aren't to be trusted. They're often the last people that should be ruling over other people. I'm sure that you have seen examples of this in the world in your lifetime. This wasn't just a reality 3,000 years ago. Here's the thing. When you don't have a clear purpose, you tend to look for fulfillment in things like power and positions and possessions and control and things that make you feel important and valuable. But it doesn't work. It tends to corrupt you, and it tends to make the people around you miserable. And the reason it doesn't work is this: humans were created to be fed and fulfilled by purpose and progress. What do I mean by progress? Fulfilling your purpose. That's progress. So this is in part the mystical spiritual food that Jesus talks about in the Gospels. I've been leading up to this for a couple weeks now. That Jesus talks about physical food represents this deeper source of fulfillment and energy and strength and comfort in life. This spiritual, mystical food that comes from connection in the kingdom of God. Now, 2 weeks ago, maybe it was 3 weeks ago, Stephen talked about Jesus' miracle of feeding the 5,000. Now, Gospel of John, I think one of the Gospels tells us it was 5,000 men plus the women and children, so there could have been like 10,000 people there. This is the only miracle that all four Gospels mention. Now, why is that? Well, one reason would be this was the only miracle that Jesus did where literally like 10,000 people witnessed it. So they went and told their friends, and they told their friends, and this was his most famous miracle because so many people were talking about it. So everyone knew about this miracle. In fact, it was probably what put Jesus in the spotlight, what put him on the map, as a miracle worker, as a spiritual leader, as a rabbi. And that story is filled with interesting insights. But what I find even more interesting is what happens after the miracle. Starting in verse 14 of chapter 6 of the Gospel of John. When the people saw the sign that Jesus had performed, they began to say, "Truly, this is the anointed one of God, the Messiah who is to come into the world." And then Jesus, realizing that they were about to come and make him their king by force, withdrew again to a secluded mountain by himself. So just like the trees wanted to make the olive tree and the fig tree and the grapevine their king, these people want to make Jesus their king. And just like the olive tree and the fig tree and the grapevine, Jesus says, no. In fact, he gets away from them and refuses to be who they want him to be. Now, there's a lot of insight here. Number one, you need to continually read the room. You need to continually be exercising discernment in every situation, in all relationships. I mean, just think, here Jesus reads the room. It wasn't a room, it was outside, it was the crowd, but the common expression, read the room. People are hungry. Okay, I'm going to help them. I'm going to feed them. A few minutes later, maybe a few hours later, Jesus reads the room again and says, now I need to get away from these people. That's discernment. Sometimes you need to help people. Sometimes you need to get away from people. Sometimes you need to get away from the very people you just helped. Discernment. Now, later on in the story, we read why Jesus refused to let these people make him their king. But one other point on discernment. It's one thing to help people, offer your help to people. It's another thing to let them control you. It's another thing to let them make you be who they want you to be. Jesus says no, not interested. But later on in this story, we see why he refused to let them make him be their king. Verse 26, this is my paraphrase. He rebukes them. He says, "You only want me to be your king because I gave you food to eat. Don't pursue physical food that rots and spoils and perishes. Instead, pursue spiritual food. For my purpose is not to bring you physical food, but the spiritual food of the kingdom of God, the divine reality." The reason Jesus refuses to be their king is because that's not who God called him to be. That wasn't his purpose. That wasn't the work that God gave him to do. Now, it would be easy to justify being king. Let's be honest, most of us would probably rationalize that, right? A bunch of people are like, we want you to be our leader, completely in control. We would probably say, okay, let's just think of in your workplace. Let's make it real. You're offered more privilege, a better position, higher status, more money, more power, more authority. You're probably going to be like, I should probably take that. And you would probably say something like this: imagine the good I can do with more privilege, more power, more money, more authority, right? That's what most of us would do. Here's the problem. Most of the time, it makes us deviate from who God has called us to be. Most of the time, it makes us deviate from doing the work that God has given us to do. And more often than not, it corrupts us. Have you ever wondered why it seems so many leaders and pastors and priests and New Age teachers and Hindu gurus, it goes across the whole world. Have you ever wondered why so many of these leaders become so corrupt? I've watched so many documentaries. I don't know why I'm obsessed with this. So many documentaries on how a leader starts off doing something that seems kind of cool. The next thing you know, whether it's financial fraud or sex scandals or cover-ups, you know what I'm talking about? Is this news to you that there's a lot of leaders who become corrupted? Why? Well, there's many, many reasons, but I'm convinced that most of those leaders start off with good intentions. In fact, I think most of those leaders start with a God-given purpose. Like I remember I've watched a few documentaries on Jonestown cult. I mean, that's an intense one. But in the beginning, I'm like, this guy was doing some cool stuff. One of the first to kind of integrate races in worship. And I'm convinced that many of these leaders who become so corrupt, they start off with a God-given calling and purpose and good intentions. But it goes off the rails for many, many reasons. But one of the reasons is this. They let people put them on a pedestal. They let people give them power and privilege and glory and authority, and it always ends badly. And a part of it is because they begin to forsake their calling. They begin to neglect their God-given purpose. They're like olive trees who stop producing olives to lord over the other trees, right? Like Jesus, we must stay focused on what God has called and equipped us to do as unique individuals. You know, today I see some faith leaders, not just today, my whole life, I've seen faith leaders try to be kings and lead political revolutions. And for 99% of them, maybe more, I honestly don't think that's what God has called them to do. Many times, if we follow the example of Jesus, many times we actually have to refuse power, position, privilege, authority. Why? Because that's what Jesus did. And he is our example. I mean, Jesus clearly refused to accept any power, position, responsibility, or authority from other people that wasn't true to who he was, who God had called him to be, and the work that God had given him to do. But there's a practical reason for this as well. Have you heard of the Peter Principle? It's a fascinating one. Peter Principle is essentially this. People tend to rise to the level of their incompetence. So, people in a workplace, they're performing really well. Say they're a salesperson. They're just knocking it out of the park. They are really performing well as salespeople. They get promoted. Now they're the sales manager or regional manager. And they're doing really well at that. They're just, oh man. So they get promoted again to vice president of operations. And they're not good at that at all. And that's where they stop. They're not promoted anymore. You continually get promoted until you don't do well, and that's where you stay the rest of your life. It's really interesting. It's an interesting principle, and we see this all over the place. Let's keep promoting people until they stop succeeding, and okay, that's your place for the rest of your life. Like an olive tree who stopped producing olives in order to manage other olive trees. You know, what Jesus is modeling here is you have to stay true to who you are, stay focused on your purpose in life, because this is what feeds your soul. That's what feeds your soul. This is how Jesus describes the spiritual food of the kingdom of God. In another story that we'll look at another time in more detail, his disciples come and they tell him, "You're hungry, Matt. You haven't eaten in a long time. You need to eat some food. We got some food for you." And he says, "I'm not hungry. I have food to eat that you don't know about." And they're confused. And so he explains. He says, "My food is to do the work that God has given me to do. My food is to fulfill the calling God has given me." The spiritual food of the kingdom of God that nourishes your soul, that energizes you, that animates you, that fulfills you on the deepest level is to fulfill your God-given purpose and do the work God has given you to do. When we live life consciously and intentionally fulfilling our God-given purpose, man, we are energized to a level, we are nourished to a degree, we are fulfilled to a level that is just incomprehensible without awareness of this kingdom of God. It really is a very different quality of life. Jesus refuses to be king. He stays focused on who God has called him to be, what God has called him to do. Because it's his spiritual food. It's what nourishes him. It's what feeds him, energizes him. It's also what gives him access to divine wisdom and power and strength and joy and freedom. So what is your purpose? Let's put a pin in that one. What is our purpose collectively as a church? You know, there are many other organizations in the world that intersect with the work that churches do. But there's one thing that only the church does or is supposed to do. Extend grace. We are a grace distributing machine, or if you don't like that kind of mechanical image, we are a grace bearing grace fruit tree. Just extending grace to everyone. I mean, in this culture, I don't care if you're on the left, the right, in the middle, there is just not a lot of grace. You're canceled for something you did 20 years ago. Where's the grace? No grace. That's where the church comes in. We're ridiculous. We're like Oprah giving away cars in her head. You get grace, and you get grace, and you in the back get grace. Everybody gets grace. Even the murderer, even the murderer. Even that guy, even that guy. Everyone gets grace. Now, I see a lot of churches, in fact, my whole life, engaging in culture wars. My whole life I grew up, what are we at war at now? Oh, we're at war with the people who are declaring war on Christmas. Oh, okay. We're always at culture wars. Have you heard of that? The church is at war with culture, because that's clearly what Jesus did. He marched right to Rome and said, here's all the things that you're doing wrong. No. All these churches involved in culture wars, most, if not all of them, are straying from their primary calling, which is to extend grace to everyone. And as a result, when a church engages in these culture wars, they are actually turning away from the spiritual food of the kingdom of God. They're actually seeking control and strength and power and security in worldly power. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not saying all the things that these churches are concerned about and protesting are not legitimate. Some of the things probably are. What I'm saying is this: we need to follow Jesus' example. And Jesus doesn't let anyone or anything distract him from his primary purpose, the work that God has given him to do, even legitimate concerns and needs. So this isn't something that just, the culture war Christians struggle with. This is something that the bleeding hearts, good-hearted people, I need to help everybody kind of Christian struggles with as well. Because we think that if a need is legitimate, well, we need to respond. No, you don't. Why? Because that's not the example Jesus gave us. And it often takes you off course from the work that God has given you to do. You end up becoming an olive tree that's doing all this other stuff, and you're not producing any olives. And this other stuff you're producing, isn't that great? Because the thing you're good at is producing olives. Let me give you an example of this in Jesus' life. Luke chapter 12, verse 13 to 14. In the middle of Jesus' teaching, kind of like this, someone interrupts him. Someone in the crowd says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide our father's inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Yes, let me drop what I'm doing and help you. It sounds like you're being treated unfairly. This is injustice. I care about justice. I will help you." No, that's not how Jesus responds. He says, "Man, who made me an executor or arbiter over you and your brother's inheritance? I'm busy. I'm working here," right? What are you doing? That's not my job. That's not my work to be immediate. Now, notice, Jesus isn't saying, "I'm reading you and your concern is not legitimate." Jesus isn't saying that an injustice isn't being done. Jesus isn't saying your concern is not real or legitimate. Jesus doesn't ask any questions to see if it is. He doesn't say, meet me later and I'll see if... No, that's not my job. That's not the work that I'm supposed to be doing. There are probably people who have a calling to help people like you in your situation. Go talk to them, because I will not allow you to distract me from fulfilling the God-given purpose upon my life. We don't know how to do that because, especially Canadian Christians, we have to be polite and nice. Of course I'll help you. I have 1,000 other things to do, and I'll probably neglect my children, and they'll resent me later on in life, but we'll deal with that in counseling later on because I'm going to help you. The olives can wait. There'll always be time to make olives as an olive tree, maybe in retirement. I know a number of ex-pastors who have left the ministry. Some of them left the church altogether because they had to survive, because it burned them out. Here's something I've discovered. I believe it's true. In fact, just this week I heard of another good-hearted pastor checking out. I'm done. Here's something that I believe is very true. If you focus on fulfilling other people's needs, expectations, and demands, you will burn out. Eventually. I don't care how wonderful you are, how prayerful you are, how you will eventually burn out. It might take years or decades, but eventually you'll be like, I'm done. But if you focus on fulfilling your God-given purpose, it does the opposite. It doesn't burn you out. It feeds you. It nourishes you. It energizes you. It fulfills you. There's a huge difference. And that's what Jesus was tuned into. I'm not going to get distracted doing this and that. I need to stay focused on what God has called me to do. If something is burning you out, you need to check your motives, right? Because a lot of the good things we do for other people, let's not kid ourselves, it's really about our ego and our reputation. Are you looking to other people to feed you by them needing you, or praising you, or speaking well of you, telling others, oh, that person's so amazing? This is subconscious. We might not think about this, but what are our real motives? Are we trying to find our food in that? In pleasing other people? Or are we trying to find our food, this spiritual food, from the kingdom of God that comes from doing what God has called you to do? Remember, early on in my ministry, one of my mentors said, Troy, when you are more focused on your reputation than your calling, you're on the road to burnout. When you focus more on people liking you than doing the work God has given you to do, when you can't say no to people, you're on borrowed time. Eventually, you'll be done. Why? Because it's not sustainable. That's why Jesus had to get away by himself, because once you start helping people, more people are coming. Don't think you're like, oh, I've helped people and less people are going to come. If people hear, whoa, that guy helped so-and-so. Oh, man, I'm going to go see that guy, right? As soon as you start helping people, if you become known as a person who's generous or shares, or the lineup starts, right? And it's not sustainable. Jesus must be our example. Notice Jesus didn't focus on his reputation. He didn't care what other people thought about him. I mean, he was accused of basically every sin, and even more, he was accused of being demon-possessed. Like, Jesus just didn't care. I know people are going to think this, and his disciples and his parents and his brothers will be like, you can't, got to stop. People are talking. I don't care. I do the work that God has given me to do. If people want to talk, people are going to talk. That's amazing power and freedom he has. He focuses on the work God has given him to do. If you want more energy in life, more spiritual nourishment and fulfillment in life, don't let the expectations of other people direct your life path and trajectory. Only the Spirit of God has the authority to direct your life path, your work, your time, your energy. Only the Spirit of God. My assumption is, I'm not going to point at anyone in particular because I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but my sense is some of us are olive trees who have just gotten so busy doing other things, we don't have time to produce olives anymore. Some of us are fig trees that have, we're so busy trying to be what other people want us to be that we just are no longer producing figs. Some of us are trying to make money and to get promoted, and we're trying to attain this life that other people have convinced us is truly fulfilling and will bring us happiness, and we're no longer focusing on fulfilling the God-given purpose we've been given. My sense is if you're not thriving, if you're not energized and fed by life, that's a good indication that you're neglecting your God-given purpose. Now, sometimes these messages can be frustrating because you might be like, I don't know what my purpose is. Picasso, not that he's an incredible example of Christianity, but he was a brilliant artist, and he said this: the meaning of life is to discover your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away, share it with others. And I believe that's true. But I've also, I've walked with a lot of people over I've been doing this almost 25 years. Talked to a lot of people. And I've just noticed a lot of people, they don't know what their gift is. They don't know what their purpose is. And that can be frustrating. What is your purpose? How do you figure it out? Well, I don't really have a 4-step plan. If you do these 4 things, then you will know your... But here's what I would say. Jesus later on, we're going to talk about this later, but Jesus says the Father is pleased to give you the kingdom. The Father, your Creator, desires you to know your purpose and your gift and to make a difference in the world in your own unique way. Here's what I would encourage you to do if you don't know. Every night before you go to sleep and every morning as soon as you wake up, I want you to pray. I want you to say, Spirit of the living God, Spirit of Christ, I invite you into my mind, into my heart, my body, my soul. Reveal to me what my gift is, what my purpose is. Do that every night before you go to bed, before you go to sleep. Wake up every morning, do that, and then just pay attention. Our purpose, our gift is revealed in stages throughout life. Like look at Moses. God is continually revealing things to him throughout his life, but it's not until he's 80 years old that he finally knows with clarity, this is your purpose, this is your gift, this is your path. And by the time he's 80, he says, oh, I'm too old for this. Can you find somebody else? You might be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. Don't think that, I probably missed it. No. You have a gift, you have a purpose, and we all need you to lean into that and live into it fully. Now, if you do that, start praying every night, every morning, I think God will start to reveal things, but what will usually happen first is God will remind you of things God has already revealed to you. In my experience, when God reveals something to you, until you put that into practice and apply it to your life, God doesn't reveal something else to you. It's not like God's like, okay, you're right, that probably wasn't very important. I'll get to the good stuff, the exciting stuff. No. To the person who is faithful in the little things, then much is given to them to be faithful in. Right? Start with the little things. If you're not putting that into practice, what God has revealed to you, don't expect the big things. There's a process to this. I remember early on in my ministry, I was praying that. I was like, God, what is your huge vision for my life? What is the grand plan that's going to change the world that I'm a part of? So humble, right? All young ministers are very humble that way. We all assume that for some reason God has a great plan for our life, not like all those other pastors who just sort of has a mediocre plan for their lives. And as I was praying this, I don't always get responses, but sometimes the Spirit communicates very clearly. And I remember on this occasion, I was on a spiritual retreat. I had been fasting and praying, and the Spirit of God was just very clear. You already know what to do. Stop asking me about this. First of all, take care of your temple, your body. Start eating better, get more exercise, go to bed on time. Start helping your wife out around the house more. I said, pardon? You know those moments where you're like, okay, I'm not tuning into God anymore. Who is speaking to me? Start sharing your money with people who have less than you. Start being generous. Start extending grace to everyone, even those people you don't want to. You already know what to do, Troy. Stop hounding me about this. When you get that, when you're faithful in those things, then we'll talk. It wasn't until, about 15 years after that I got the next revelation of the calling upon my life, my divine purpose. I was 40 years old. And I know there's still more because I'm still working on applying that. It comes in stages. But I'm telling you, we often wonder, what is your purpose? Well, start with the desires of God that you already understand. You already understand some of the desires that God has for your life and for people in general. Start there. More revelation will come.
I remember when I was often struggling for direction in my life, my biggest fear was that God would send me someplace, maybe a missionary in Africa or somebody to do something I really, really didn't want. And I think sometimes he does that, but more often than not, I think it's a lot what Troy said, you kind of already know, right? It's like, yeah, Michael, pick up your guitar. It's beautiful you are. It's like, yeah, but I love that. Yeah, that's okay. Right? Sometimes we forget that God really is good, right? He's a good Father. He's the one who, He's designed us already to enjoy, to excel in those moments. So let's just stand and sing the goodness of God. I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me all these days. I've been held in your hands from the moment that I wake up till I lay my head. I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in the darkness, close like no other. I love you as a father. I know you as a friend. And I hear you the good I was thinking